It started as an ordinary evening. I was alone in the house, just like every other Friday night. The faint hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound breaking the silence. I didn't mind the solitude. Most of the time it felt comforting. But that night, something felt different. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint exactly. Just a feeling, an itch at the back of my mind, like the air in the room had turned heavier, thicker. The house itself was nothing special, just an old two-story home I had rented to escape the chaos of the city. The realtor had called it charming, but I found it dated, creaking floorboards, faded wallpaper, and windows that rattled with even the gentlest breeze. Yet, it had its charm. Or at least that's what I told myself. I remember sitting in my armchair by the window, a mug of tea growing cold in my hands, staring at the darkened woods just beyond the yard. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting strange shadows on the ground. I wasn't scared. Why would I be? This was my safe space. Still, the shadows seemed to move in ways that didn't quite make sense, almost like they had a rhythm of their own. Then I heard it. A voice. Faint, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of a breeze, but distinctly human. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Living alone can do that to you, I suppose. Make you hear things, see things that aren't really there. I shook it off, dismissing it as nothing more than the wind playing tricks on my ears. But then it came again, clearer this time. Help. Me. The voice was soft but strained, like it was coming from someone far away, or from someone trying not to be heard. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't coming from inside the house, that much I was sure of. It was coming from outside. I stood up, mug forgotten on the table, and moved toward the window. The yard was empty, the woods beyond still and silent. I strained my ears, hoping to catch the sound again, but there was nothing. Just the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "You're imagining things," I whispered to myself. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. As the minutes ticked by, I tried to push the incident out of my mind, convincing myself it was just the wind, a trick of my tired brain. But then, just as I was beginning to relax, it happened again. This time, the voice was louder. "Please, don't leave me." I froze. It wasn't just louder, it was closer. The sound seemed to be coming from the woods, but it was impossible to tell exactly where. It wasn't like any voice I'd ever heard before. There was something strange about it, something hollow, like it wasn't coming from a person at all. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't imagining it. Someone, or something, was out there, and they were calling for me. I stood frozen by the window, my breath shallow and quick. My rational mind fought to explain what I had just heard, but deep down, a gnawing unease had taken root. The voice, there was no mistaking it this time. It was real. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't my imagination. Someone was out there, or something. The thought sent a shiver coursing through my entire body. Still, I tried to calm myself. Maybe someone was lost in the woods. Maybe they needed help. That's what I told myself as I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slipped on my shoes. The beam of light trembled slightly in my hand as I stepped out into the cool night air. The woods loomed ahead, dark and impenetrable. The moonlight barely reached through the thick canopy, leaving most of the path cloaked in shadow. I hesitated at the edge, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. Too quiet. The usual night sounds, crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, were absent. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is someone out there?" For a moment there was nothing, just the oppressive silence pressing down on me. Then faintly, the voice returned. "Help me." It was distant, but unmistakable, coming from deeper within the woods. My heart raced as I strained to pinpoint its location. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward, the crunch of leaves underfoot sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I moved further in, the air grew colder, not the natural chill of a fall evening, but an icy, unnatural cold that seeped into my skin and sent goosebumps racing up my arms. I could feel it in my chest, a weight pressing down, making it harder to breathe. The voice came again, louder this time. "Please, don't leave me." I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but the beam seemed to struggle against the darkness, barely illuminating the path ahead. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I took another step forward, then another, my unease growing with each one. The path seemed to twist and turn in ways I didn't remember, as though the forest itself was changing, shifting around me. And then I saw it. A figure. At first I thought it was a person, a woman, standing just ahead on the path. Her back was to me, her long dark hair hanging in tangled strands over her shoulders. She was wearing what looked like a white dress torn and stained with mud. She wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still. "Are you okay?" I called out, my voice breaking slightly. No response. I took a hesitant step closer, my flashlight trained on her. As the beam hit her back, she moved, her head tilting slightly to the side. It wasn't a natural movement. Too slow, too deliberate. "Do you need help?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. She turned. Her face. God, I'll never forget her face. It was pale, almost translucent, her eyes hollow and sunken, dark as the void. Her mouth moved, but the words didn't match the motions. "Help. Me." The sound wasn't coming from her mouth. It was coming from everywhere, above me, behind me, inside me. My chest tightened as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Stay back," I shouted, though I wasn't sure if I was warning her or begging her to keep her distance. She didn't move, just stared at me with those empty eyes. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. Not gone as in she walked away. Gone as in she vanished, dissolving into the shadows like she had never been there. My hands were trembling now, the flashlight beam jerking wildly as I turned in every direction, searching for any sign of her. The woods felt alive, the shadows shifting and writhing like they were watching me, mocking me. And then the voice came again. "Why? Did you leave me?" It was right behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. There was nothing there. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. Dropping all pretense of bravery, I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush in a blind panic. Branches scratched at my arms and face, the cold air burning my lungs, but I didn't care. I had to get out. As I broke through the tree line and into the yard, I stopped, gasping for breath. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark and unwelcoming, but it was safe, or at least safer than the woods. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing there watching me. But there was nothing, just the empty woods, silent and still once more. I stumbled inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it, as if that could keep whatever was out there away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. Who was she? What was she? And why did I feel like this was only the beginning? I sank to the floor, my back against the door, and listened. The house was quiet, just like before, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't comforting. It was oppressive. And then, from somewhere upstairs, I heard it again. "Help me." The sound of that voice, the same hollow, desperate plea, froze me where I sat. My back pressed hard against the door, My eyes locked on the staircase ahead. It had come from upstairs. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight, like a heavy weight was pressing down on it. The house was supposed to be my refuge, my safe space. But now, it felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in around me. I told myself not to go. Whatever was upstairs, it wasn't something I wanted to see. But I also knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for it to come to me. Gripping the flashlight tightly, I forced myself to stand. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, each step echoing through the silence. The air grew colder with every step, the chill biting into my skin. By the time I reached the landing, I could see my breath clouding in the dim beam of my flashlight. "Hello?" My voice barely carried, trembling as it escaped my lips. No response. I turned toward the hallway, the narrow space stretching ahead of me like a tunnel. The doors to the bedrooms were all closed except for one at the far end, the door to my room. It was ajar, the faintest sliver of darkness visible beyond it. That was when I noticed it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, passed across the gap. Someone, or something, was in my room. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But something deeper, something I couldn't explain, drew me forward. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the strange pull of that voice, still echoing in my mind. The hallway seemed to stretch longer with each step, the shadows on the walls twisting and shifting as if alive. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering just above the doorknob. The cold emanating from the room was palpable, seeping through the crack and chilling my fingertips. Gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I pushed the door open. The room was dark, the flashlight casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Everything looked wrong. The furniture was where it should have been, but it felt distorted, like I was looking at a warped version of my own space. And then I saw her. She was standing in the corner, facing the wall. Her long, dark hair hung limply over her shoulders, and her white dress looked even dirtier, stained with something darker than mud. She wasn't moving, but the air around her seemed to ripple, as if she were surrounded by a heat haze. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Slowly she turned, her movements unnaturally jerky, as if her joints didn't work the way they should. Her face was even more horrifying up close, pale, sunken, and void of life. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming wave of dread crash over me. "Why did you leave me?" she asked, her voice echoing unnaturally, like it was coming from inside my own head. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, backing away. She took a step forward, her bare feet making no sound against the floor. "You promised you wouldn't leave," she said, her voice growing louder, more distorted. "You said you'd stay." The room began to spin, the walls bending and shifting like a living thing. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, rooted in place. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance and writhe around her. "Please, I don't know you," I shouted, desperate to make her stop. Her expression twisted into something between sorrow and rage, and suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped even further. Frost began to creep up the walls, and my breath came out in panicked puffs of steam. "You left me!" she screamed, her voice splitting into a cacophony of overlapping tones, some high-pitched, others deep and guttural. "And now, you'll stay with me." Before I could react, she lunged. Her icy fingers closed around my wrist, and a searing pain shot through my arm. It felt like my very soul was being pulled from my body, a cold, suffocating void consuming me from the inside out. "No!" I screamed, wrenching my arm free and stumbling backward. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor and plunging the room into near-total darkness. I scrambled to grab it, the beam flickering wildly as I swung it toward her. But she was gone. The room was empty, the air still and silent once more. My wrist throbbed where she had touched me, the skin pale and ice cold. I didn't wait to see if she would come back. Grabbing the flashlight, I bolted out of the room and down the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. As I reached the living room, the voice came again, louder than ever. "You can't escape me." It was everywhere now, above me, below me, all around me. The walls seemed to vibrate with the force of it, the very house groaning under the weight of her presence. And then, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room, leaving me with nothing but the weak, sputtering beam of the flashlight. My pulse thundered in my ears as I backed into a corner, the cold closing in around me. "Stay with me," the voice whispered, soft and almost pleading now. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold, clammy, and impossibly strong. My scream caught in my throat as I turned, the flashlight illuminating nothing but empty air. But I wasn't alone. The room was filled with shadows, figures flickering in and out of existence at the edge of the light. They were everywhere, surrounding me, closing in. And at the center of them all was her hollow eyes staring directly into mine. "You belong to me now," she said, her voice echoing with finality. I don't know how long I stood there, pressed against the cold wall of the living room, surrounded by shadows that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own terrible life. The flashlight trembled in my hands, the beam darting frantically across the room. But no matter where I pointed it, the shadows always seemed just out of reach. And she was there, always there. Standing at the center, her pale face and hollow eyes fixed on me, unblinking. "You can't run," she whispered, her voice carrying a strange mix of sorrow and rage. "You can't hide. You left me, and now you'll stay with me." "I don't even know who you are," I shouted, my voice breaking as the fear clawed its way up my throat. Her head tilted to the side, unnaturally far, like her neck was made of something brittle. "Don't you?" she asked, stepping closer. I scrambled backward, my mind racing. Nothing about this made sense. I didn't know her. How could I? I had only moved into this house a few months ago, looking for some peace and quiet. There was no way I could have done anything to her. But then, deep in the recesses of my mind, a memory surfaced. It was faint, fragmented, like an old photograph that had been left out in the rain. A road, dark and slick with rain. The sound of tires skidding. A scream. No, it couldn't be. I didn't mean to, I stammered, the words spilling out before I even knew what I was saying. Her expression twisted, and for the first time, I saw something other than rage in her hollow eyes. Pain. "You left me there," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't even stop." The memory hit me like a freight train. That night. That terrible, awful night. I'd been driving home late, the rain coming down so hard I could barely see. And then, her. She had come out of nowhere, stepping onto the road, her figure illuminated for a split second in my headlights before... "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "It wasn't my fault. I didn't see you until it was too late." "But you didn't stop," she said, her voice breaking. "You didn't even look back." Tears blurred my vision as guilt overwhelmed me. She was right. I hadn't stopped. I had been so scared, so desperate to get away that I had kept driving, leaving her there in the rain, broken and alone. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, the shadows seemed to pause, the oppressive weight in the room lifting ever so slightly. Her expression softened, and I hoped, that maybe, just maybe, she would forgive me. But then her face twisted into something unrecognizable. "Sorry isn't enough," she hissed, her voice growing deeper, darker. The shadows surged forward, enveloping me in cold, suffocating darkness. "You left me to die. Now you'll know what it feels like." I screamed as the darkness closed in, wrapping around me like a living thing. It wasn't just cold. It was emptiness, a void that seeped into my very soul, pulling me deeper and deeper into its grasp. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath. The room was gone. The house was gone. I was standing in the middle of the road, rain pouring down around me. It was the same road from that night, the same stretch of pavement where I had left her. But something was wrong. The rain didn't feel wet. The world around me seemed muted, the colors washed out, the sounds distant and muffled. And then I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road just as she had been that night, her white dress soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. But this time, I wasn't in a car. I was standing right in front of her. "Now you understand," she said, her voice calm but filled with an eerie finality. "Understand what?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding rain. She stepped closer, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. "What it feels like to be forgotten, to be left behind." I looked down and froze. There, lying at her feet, was my own body, twisted, broken, lifeless. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. I wasn't alive. I had died. Somehow, some way she had taken me, pulled me into her world. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This can't be real. This can't be happening." She knelt beside my body, her pale hand resting gently on my chest. "It's real," she said, "and now you'll stay here, with me." I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The world around me began to fade, the rain growing softer, the colors draining away until there was nothing left but darkness. Her voice was the last thing I heard before the void claimed me completely. "Forever,"